Hello and welcome to the Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast. I'm your host, Nurse Rosa Hart, and today my guest is RJ Kedziora. Thank you so much for joining me today, RJ.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we connected on LinkedIn, and that has been such an amazing way to connect with healthcare leaders and stakeholders just all over the world. And RJ, you have been in the healthcare tech space for like over 20 years, right?
Yeah, in pharmacy for a little bit before that too. So it's crazy that I can start talking about decades of doing this.
And you started when you were like two, right? So.
Two, yes, exactly. I started really early on when I was two, but it's fascinating though because I did start with technology and computers. I was really fortunate when I was, I guess, in seventh grade.
Mhm.
Back in the mid 80s, I was, fortunate my parents bought me a, personal computer way back then. And, I
Oh,
played a lot of games. Don't get me wrong. Like, I definitely played a lot of games, had the
yeah.
Atari and all the other systems too. But was always fascinated by what technology could do.
So you said you got started in pharmacy. Did you think you were planning to be a pharmacist at one point?
No, not, never. I went to Duquesne University in the early 90s, which did have a good pharmacy school, still does have a good pharmacy school. I went for computer science. I really thought going into college I was going to get a degree, a PhD in artificial intelligence. That was my path.
Did
Through
they
high
have
school.
that then?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, this is
Really?
the yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
wow.
So this is one of the interesting things about where we are today with AI that everyone's like, "Oh my God, AI." Well, AI has been around since the 50s. It's not new. The latest inception of it is new.
What counted
And
as AI in the 50s
Yeah, so back in the 50s, and this is
that
interesting.
you don't
Um,
remember, but you heard about,
yeah,
right?
I wasn't there in person. But there was what's interesting. So you look at Gen AI today and you can converse and have a conversation with it, and it
Hmm.
amazes me day after day kind of thing. Many people it amazes. And Oprah had a special about it. So it's like, okay, now everyone's going to know about it because Oprah was talking about it. But back then, in the 50s, 60s, I don't even know the exact year, someone developed a computer program called Liza. And you could talk to it. And it fooled people into thinking it was a real person. Not a lot of people, but it did fool people into thinking you were actually talking to a human. And all it
Like with
did,
a voice?
it was pure typing.
Okay, so it
And
was
all,
responding by typing.
yeah, like so you would type a question or respond something and it would come back with a response just like ChatGPT does. So you'd be like, da, 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 hey, I had a great day. And all it was doing was what you think of like the very stereotypical um, psychologist interview that you have where they always just, well, why? Why do you feel like that? And that's all this program was doing. It was very simple, and that's how it responded. It'd take like, noun, verb, from what you had just typed and be like, well, why do you think that? Why do you feel that? How does that make you feel? And people believed, it was not a computer. Not a lot
I
of
think
people
it
were
was
fooled by
because
it,
there was a
obviously.
lack of people actually asking them about their thoughts and things. So they just
It could
really
have been.
wanted
It's
there to
like,
be somebody interested in them.
yeah. So that could have
Oh,
very well been it of just like, oh wow, someone's paying attention to me. Someone's curious about what
it
is
must
going on
be
in my life.
real.
Those are different times, obviously.
Yeah,
And like I said, it didn't fool many people. Where Gen AI now is fooling a lot of people, which is
right.
a whole different story.
Yeah, so you started a company of your own. How far out of college were you when you
Yeah,
started
so I
Estenda?
graduated in the early 90s, and my goal was, as I said, to get a PhD in AI. But then I got the job offer. And it was like, do I go and take on more debt or do I go out in the working world? So I chose to go out in the working world and didn't get the PhD in AI. Um, but I've always sort of had my hand in it and played with it and involved in projects and various iterations of AI and expert systems, developed over the years with various technologies. Worked my way through the consulting companies. Worked for one that did a lot of work in the pharmaceutical space, helping build technology systems. And
Hmm.
very early on, realized technology is important. Technology is powerful. It's amazing what it can do. But it is much more about the people and the process. And when you are developing systems, it is just that. It's about the people and process. I'm not developing as I develop a system, or people who work for me now develop systems. They're not developing it for themselves as a software developer. They're developing it for the doctors, for the patients, to provide better care.
For the
And
nurses.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we, through that journey of working with the pharmaceutical companies, it was like, okay, what can I do to make a difference, add value to the world? And that's where, with a good friend, Drew Lewis, and I started Estenda back in 2003, focusing on digital health before it was called digital health. We
What
actually
was
got
it
our
called then?
and just healthcare software development.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There was no specific name for it. It was like we're just developing systems in the healthcare space. This was, pre-iPhone days,
Mm-hmm.
pre-social media days,
Mm-hmm.
which is always fascinating. There was a world before, the iPhone world before Instagram
Well,
and all
I
those
do
fun things.
remember that. My dad had a car phone.
Oh, there you
Did
go.
you ever have one of those bag phones in the car?
I'm familiar. I didn't have one of those. I carried around the pager back then. So
He had one of those too.
yeah.
Yeah, so I've seen it. I lived through it, but I'm very thankful for my iPhone. Thank you very much. And I'm excited about the iPhones that have built-in AI or will in a couple weeks.
It's getting to the point where you're not gonna be able to avoid it. It's just gonna be everywhere. Um, and that has its own challenges. But yeah, we got Estenda started, and we were fortunate. We didn't have that typical startup experience of like, oh, what's our first project, our first client. Drew, my business partner, knew some people at the Joslin Diabetes Center, and they were part of a congressional grant
Oh
for
wow.
development of a diabetes disease management system in military healthcare. So we were fortunate and got to work with Walter Reed Army Medical Center, the Boston VA, the Indian Health Services, a bunch of community health centers across the country. So it's fascinating work diving into the world of diabetes and all
Yeah.
sorts of different care providers, the doctors, the nurses, the educators, nutritionists,
Mm-hmm.
to help people with diabetes. So that's how we got our start.
Mm-hmm.
In the first 10 years, we're very grant focused, where we would go in either from military healthcare, which does a lot of granting even today, to the NIH, where we got to do some R01 studies, like 5-year research studies to prove out, the technology we were building, does it actually help people? Happy to say yes, it did. It
Whew,
was good.
good.
Yeah, it was nice when you go into a big study like that over, a long period of time, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Like we did pilot studies, lots of user feedback to see if it made sense, and it kept tracking in a really good direction. But getting to work with the community health centers, various different, nurses caring for these patients just made it really rewarding because you started hearing not just you getting the scientific results of the research back to say, okay, this looks good. In talking to the educators, the nurses, and it's like, hey, using your software, we saw, we caught this for this patient kind of thing and made a difference in their lives, which it just gives you that warm feeling when you're going to bed at night. I've built the accounting systems, I've built inventory systems, a railroad car scheduling system at one point in life. It was like, okay, you need to get that railroad car where it needs to be. Useful,
We
important,
saw what
necessary.
happened during the pandemic when those railroad cars weren't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
That shut things down.
So, important, but
Mm-hmm.
healthcare has that, extra sense of improving people's lives. So that's what
Yeah,
we do
in a
today. The
tangible
last
way.
10 years of our world has been still doing that grant-based research. We have PhDs on staff, driving a lot of that. But then also getting into more commercial ventures with organizations. So we're a professional services firm focused on that software, data analytics, and AI solutions where we're helping either the big corporations, medical device companies, and some startups along the way develop their products that they're taking to market. So get to dabble in a lot of different places and try out different solutions, but very
Any
much.
names we would recognize, like any electronic health records, or
We've done integrations with the big guys, with the Epics, the next gens, the Cerners, done those integrations. That's a fairly typical project for us. Working with a startup or even large organizations are interested in how to do that, so we can enable that. And some startups that we work with, always fascinating. Our biggest project that I can talk about probably is with the Joslin Diabetes Center, which is in Boston. It's called the Joslin Vision Network, and we've been a big part of this, the entire existence of Estenda for the last 20 plus years. It's a diabetic teleretinopathy surveillance program for the Indian Health Services, which is responsible for the Native American population here in the U.S. And diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of preventable blindness. So if we can find it, we can help. So across the US, there are about 100 cameras deployed where we can take these images of the retina or the back of your eye for detection of retinopathy. And so now we've amassed, several million of images, over doing all of this time kind of thing. And working with various people to look, how do we apply AI and machine learning to improve the capabilities of that system? So leads to,
Because the diagnostics of those images had to be done by humans first, and so is it a lot of training the AI to recognize those features?
that's exactly it. Within this program, they're still all human read, but we're moving towards a world where they are, read by a machine learning algorithm, and
Yeah.
it really speeds up the process.
Yeah, we have a
And
lot of radiology AI things happening in the hospitals, and it really does speed things up and help. Because, I mean, the human error is a thing. So I know a lot of people are worried, and I actually saw this post that I don't know if you reshared it or you commented on it. Somebody was talking about people's concerns about AI making errors, and I was like, have you seen how many human errors get made all the time? Like, if you can take away some of the busy work in order to allow your brain room to catch the errors instead of create them themselves, that would
that's
be
the
helpful.
interesting question of particularly Gen AI these
Mm-hmm.
days. Everybody's holding it up against a standard and doesn't make a mistake. And yes, we have to be cautious. Don't get me wrong. We have to
For
be
sure.
careful. We are dealing with the health and wellness of people, so you do have to be cautious. The physician motto, the medical motto, do no harm. It definitely applies here. But humans are fallible. We do make mistakes. And the flip side of that too is the amount of information that is being generated and science that is being generated in all fields, but particularly the medical field, we can't keep up with that level of information. So how do we use the power of technology, and I think, to let humans be human? So instead of, you as a nurse having to, work with a patient to, track information and enter it in the electronic medical record, you know, in typing on the computer, not interacting with the patient. You didn't get into medicine to work on a computer. You got into medicine to help people. So one of the big uses now of Gen AI is the idea of ambient listening. So as you are talking with a patient, as the physician's talking with the patient, and you're gathering that information, it can listen to that and transcribe it and put it into the electronic record for you. So now you're not doing that, which is very powerful.
Do
And
you
then you
work with
combine,
Dragon transcription services
yes,
or? Yeah.
that's exactly it.
Yeah. Our doctors have
Um,
been using those Dragon transcriptions forever.
mhm.
I mean, by forever, I mean as long as I've been there, you know,
a few years,
a few years.
just a few. But yeah, and it's fascinating. So now you take the AI, and another big capability is summarizing the patient record because there's so much information in the EMR. It's like, and it gets buried and it's hard to find.
Yeah, not just
So,
word for word transcription, but interpretation and application of that data of where should it go in the patient's chart in the different categories.
mhm, yeah. So now the AI can listen to what's going on in that conversation, is aware of what's the background history of that patient because it has access to the EMR data, is aware of the research and the science of medicine. I'm looking forward to, one of these vendors somewhere along the way is going to start putting all this together. And hey, if you want to do this, give me a call. We can, work it out. and put it all together to now surface questions to the physician, to the nurse. So I don't want the computer today, because patients aren't that trusting yet. I don't want the computer asking that question of the patient, but have the nurse, have the doctor ask those questions and surface them, kind of thing, to bring in that information. I think it's a really powerful paradigm shift to be able to. Yeah.
Well, and in Epic, we have like those bubbles pop up that are reminders of, oh, look, their lactic acid was this. Let's drop the sepsis protocol, you know?
Mhm.
And so, I mean, we have elements of that already picking up on trigger questions or trigger values, prompting, does this need to move on to the next step? So I think we're getting close.
Yes, that absolutely works. That technology exists. We've helped develop some of those algorithms over the years. There is the idea of alert fatigue too. Too many of those things start popping up. You as a human
Mm-hmm.
start
Yes.
ignoring them, start looking past them because you're human, you're tired, you're working a long shift.
Again, that
Have
human error, the operator error.
it happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, so how do we use the power of the technology to improve that? I'm not the only one, like for lots of people, and it's not artificial intelligence, it's augmented intelligence. Like, how's it helping us return to what we want to do? And so instead of trying to type those notes into the EMR and look at the record to find that lab value, let the computer do it and you interact with the patient.
And I love the idea of it prompting you with questions to ask the patient. That's another, it's like stimulating conversation for you to interact with the patient and allow them to participate in their care. So, are you working with any nurses in the development of anything like this right now?
Not at the moment. If you're interested, love to help you. A lot of it's interesting as we work with these AI systems and stuff like that. A lot of we'll start the conversation. Customers will start the conversation with us around we want to do X, Y, and Z with AI. We want to apply Gen AI. We want to develop a new machine learning algorithm for imaging. And the conversation always quickly turns to data. And it's like, okay, do you have your data governance policies? Do you have the right permissions in place to use this data and kind of thing? That's really, even, we are involved in these AI projects and stuff. They always start with data in so many ways, shapes, and forms kind of thing. Um,
Yeah. And I know that you have some exciting things on the horizon that you would like to see implemented to improve healthcare. I would need to ask you the $1 billion question because on the Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast, you have to answer the $1 billion question of if you were given a grant, for example, since you're used to working with grants, maybe this isn't such a stretch for you, RJ. But if you were given a $1 billion grant to implement changes that would have a huge strategic impact on and meet the needs that you've seen, then what would you like to see developed?
so many things. Oddly, $1 billion. You got to up your ante. $1 billion doesn't go far these days, unfortunately. I think of it in a couple different ways of what could we do with $1 billion.
And that's why you have to use
One,
it strategically, right?
you have to use it strategically, but I'm going to give you three sort of things here.
Okay.
Um, One, the U.S. needs to move to value-based medicine. We need to change how we deliver care in this country. It's not effective.
Does
Our,
that
our
value based medicine mean the patient experience must be a 10 out of 10?
Yes, that is a part of it. And because you get to that 10 out of 10 because our healthcare system right now is sick based. If you're sick, one, you're not happy, and you have to go to the doctor, and you might not hear the answers you want. Um, so we have to move to where it's about wellness and where you don't have to, we're one of the only industrial countries that doesn't have guaranteed healthcare. Something's wrong with that picture. And so moving to value-based care, we're sort of pushing the world. I think to do that, there's probably some sort of like advertising and advocacy campaign around that. But part of that, and this is where like I get this three-part answer, it's the personal accountability. And because we have this healthcare system and the way it's been driven, and you work, you get healthcare, there's not the idea of personal accountability for my health, for your health, is sort of dropped by the wayside. So we need to get back to that. And that's my second point is food as nutrition, food as medicine. You know, how can we change the food systems to enable people to eat better, eat healthier, eat the whole foods, shop at the periphery of a supermarket. You know, eating healthy is more costly than eating the garbage that is produced by our industrial food society. So I think that's the second part of it. But the third, me as a technologist, I'm really fascinated by, how can we help drive that behavior change? So yes, we need to move to value-based care. Food is a huge component of improving the health and wellness of everyone in America, everybody in the world. But we're all carrying around these smartphones. We're tied to them, for better or worse. That's where we have a point to engage with people to help improve their health and wellness. You wear an Apple Watch, and there's 6 or 7 different rings out there now in market that provide metric information. Continuous glucose monitors are now available for people without diabetes. So you can actually look to see what the impact of food is on your body, what the impact of movement is on your body. So creating and proliferating the technology to help educate people about what does it mean to eat healthier, to move, to be more physically active, to get the better sleep, and make that difference. In healthcare today, we have, an obesity crisis. We have a mental health crisis in the US, if not the world. There aren't enough people to care for those in need. Not even need, people who want it. There's just not enough professionals there. So we can use the power of technology, and there's an area of digital health called digital therapeutics. And I think of it as the difference between, supplement you might get, which has some evidence, some historical background of like, okay, this might make a difference, but it's not really been proven. That's where you see all those, the advertisements on TV and the little letters at the bottom. It's like not intended to treat or diagnose a disease. The digital therapeutic is intended to make that difference, has gone through the FDA, review and approval process. So
Some examples of those.
there's a number on the market that can treat asthma, can treat anxiety. There's a couple that just got approved recently. It's just amazing what they can do
Mm-hmm.
to be able to treat those conditions through the use of your mobile app on your phone. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
treat various different conditions, diabetes. So it's fascinating that capability exists today. So it's not very well known. So help develop that $1 billion if I haven't used it all up already. Help develop this technology, get it out into the world where it can make a difference. The mobile app, phone app, now the Gen
That can
AI.
educate people on the state of their own body and how they
Yeah,
can make their own body healthier. For example, that can be really cost prohibitive, right? Like Apple Watches or the Samsung Galaxy Ring or the new Ultra Human Ring. There's a huge price point there for people. It might not be considered huge to everybody, but for the majority of people, it can be pretty cost prohibitive. So if we make that available to more people so they could learn their own body systems. I know using one of those glucose continuous monitors was so transformative for my dad to see, like you were talking about, the fluctuations in blood sugar when he had, the same amount of protein versus carbohydrates, or the same amount of vegetables versus bread, right? Maybe they're both carbs, but your body metabolizes them in different ways and speeds, and there's spikes and drops. And so being able to see that on a personal level, I think you're right, is really incredible for people to see the application in their own life, and it's not just some idea out there for the sciencey people to talk about.
That's exactly it. And I'm fortunate I don't have diabetes. I did wear one of these CGM recently to see, I understand the science. I do eat well, I do exercise, um, and I know the science, but it was very interesting to see, okay, I'm going to eat, a cup of yogurt, and this is what happens to my blood glucose. It goes up and then it comes back down. It's like, okay, interesting. And then I do the same thing, but I add protein powder into it,
Mm-hmm.
and it impacts that spike in glucose. It doesn't go as high. Like I know this is what's supposed to happen, but then to see it is very powerful. And then if you after you eat, if you go for a walk for 10 minutes, you don't have to go run, you don't have to do high intensity interval training, you don't have to break a sweat, just go for a walk. It makes a difference. And again, doing that exercise of like, okay, I'm going to eat, not walk. Okay, here's what happened. Next day, eat the same meal and then go walk and see the difference. Very powerful.
Can you wear one the whole time you're doing a triathlon?
I can and I did.
Yeah.
Um,
What was your takeaway from that?
but it's interesting because, well, one, I did wear it, but I wasn't carrying my phone around with me,
Mm-hmm.
so I couldn't see real time
You had to
what
look
was
at
happening.
retrospective
I
data.
had to look at it retrospectively, and there is with CGM, it's a delay of like 15 minutes kind of thing. It's not, to the second of what's going on in your body.
Mm-hmm.
But afterwards, it was interesting to see how my glucose did go down towards the end of the bike. I wasn't eating enough to maintain that, and so as I went into the run, I did have that drop, and reflecting on my experience of being in the moment of that event of like, okay, until I had that first sugar gel, which is just pure sugar,
Mm-hmm.
um, I was starting to feel that. So my takeaway was like, okay, I need to eat more on the bike. So for just from a sports athletic perspective, retrospectively, it was interesting to see that. Um, I'm not going to do it day to day. I did a 2 week experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that I'm healthy, and I don't. I always try and not be over the top with this stuff. I did burn myself out on metrics, a few years back, kind of thing, doing my athletic training, and it was like, oh, I go out for a run, and at the time it was just timing my run with a watch, and I'd be like, oh, today's run was 4 seconds faster and it just became a little too much. So I recognized I had to pull back from that for me personally. But you're seeing that, and it's a cautionary note with the CGMs because as more and more people are purchasing these and using those, I'm starting to see the blog articles and just the articles in the news media about the anxiety over their glucose numbers, the blood sugar number, what it's actually doing. It's absolutely normal for it to go up and come back down.
Well, and
And
that
this,
means they're paying attention to it, right? So,
yeah,
isn't it better to have anxiety over actual data than to worry about things that may or may not exist?
it's some anxiety. It's, because then you get into, issues of food and eating and body dysmorphia and all those types of things. So you got to
Oh,
be careful
yeah.
of it.
Can't be
So
enabling those
yeah,
thought
you
processes.
have to be careful, and so it
Sure.
is interesting seeing those articles, and people being open about that and be like,
Yeah.
and I had that moment, the first day I was wearing it, and I ate, and it went up to like 140. I was like, oh, wow, 140. Oh,
But
but
those
that's
numbers didn't
perfectly
mean
normal.
anything to you before, right? And so you're finally learning like the value of those numbers, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I really like the idea of having more, um, you have more control over your body's own processes if you understand them better. And so, there's pros and cons with
Yes.
everything.
Pros and cons with everything.
Yeah. But I like the plan of the three-pronged approach of addressing health by having value-based care and using food as medicine, and then having the digital therapeutics to help us tie those together.
I'm gonna run out of money really fast, but I'm gonna try.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. And I mean, a million was too small to imagine huge, widespread change, right?
Yeah, a
But
million.
how many people could you help if you used the $1 billion to put one of those rings on a bunch of people?
You could help an awful lot of people.
Right?
You
That would
really
be
could.
like what? It's like
Absolutely.
$300 a pop right now,
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
is
about that. Yeah, it's
about
a
what one of
decent
those rings
estimate.
is.
So,
That
yeah.
that could go a long way. I mean, shoot, a blood pressure cuff is about $40. And but that's a lot more uncomfortable. It's a lot harder to convince people to use a
Yeah.
blood pressure cuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I even the watch, like, the
Mm-hmm.
Apple Watch and other Samsung's got their watches are very capable devices, but I just can't, I can't stand wearing a watch.
Yeah,
And
I
they're
can't
bulky
sleep
and,
in them because they hurt my
Mhm.
arm. So I
Yeah.
want to try one of the rings because it seems like it would be easier to sleep in. And I want to
Yeah,
learn more about
the
sleep.
interesting, so the interesting thing about the ring, so I've been wearing one for around like 2 years now, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I don't even notice it anymore in my finger, but it does use, these lights inside of it kind of thing. And a lot of the times when I brush my hand closer to my face, like in the middle of the night kind of thing, and if that light's on at the moment kind of thing, it'll be like, oh, wait a minute.
Does it wake you
What's that?
up?
What's that light? Yeah.
Oh,
So,
wow.
which is pretty funny. I'm a light sleeper, so it's,
Obviously,
yeah.
because if that was going to wake you up, I'm like, my husband would never wake up with just a flash of light.
Nah, I need the room dark, dark, dark kind of
Oh,
thing.
okay.
No lights. I turn the clock face I put down kind of thing because I don't want any light in the room. Yeah, it's very so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that does.
I needed those dark curtains when I was working night shift and had to sleep during the day, but you get tired enough, you can sleep pretty hard.
You'll fall asleep. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, RJ, so much for taking time out of your day to talk about big ideas with me and share your insights about uh, the way that digital tools can transform healthcare. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Two best places are our company website, Estenda.com, Estenda, .com, or LinkedIn. You can search for RJ Kedziora and you'll find me. I'm
It
usually on
may be
there.
Richard Kedziora, right?
It does. I think it says Richard R.J. Kedziora.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you search R.J., there's not too many R.J. Kedzioras out in the world.
Is that just to let people know that you're the fun version?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm the fun version.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
awesome. Well, it was a pleasure talking to you today.
Yeah,
And if you
absolutely.
enjoyed this episode of the Nurse Rosa's Insights podcast, be sure to subscribe so you will be alerted when there's the next episode. And I'll see you then.